Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the U.E.'s horizon and looked out at the empty space between galaxies. His ship had been traveling for 3 months now, moving further from Earth than any human had ever gone before. The Milky Way galaxy was now just a bright spot behind them, and the Andromeda galaxy lay ahead like a distant cloud of stars. Jake was 42 years old and had spent most of his life in space. He had short brown hair that was starting to turn gray at the sides, and tired eyes that had seen too many long missions. But this mission was different. This was humanity's first real step into the vast darkness between the stars, and Jake felt the weight of that responsibility every day. The Horizon was Earth's most advanced ship, built with new quantum engines that could push them faster than anything before. The crew of 57 people had volunteered for a 5-year mission to explore the void between galaxies and see what secrets might be hiding in that empty darkness. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez sat at her station, watching the sensor readings scroll across her screen. She was the ship's chief scientist, a woman in her 30s with long black hair and bright green eyes that missed nothing. Lisa had studied alien life for most of her career, even though humanity had never found any. She hoped this mission would change that. "Captain," Lisa called out, her voice tight with excitement, "I'm getting some strange readings on the long-range sensors." Jake walked over to her station. "What kind of readings?" Lisa pointed at her screen, where several large shapes appeared as faint dots. "There's something out there. Something big. The computer says these objects are artificial, not natural." Chief Engineer Pete Collins looked up from his own console. Pete was a big man with thick arms and calloused hands from years of working on ship engines. He had been with Jake on 4 previous missions and knew how to keep the Horizon running, no matter what happened. "How big are we talking about?" Pete asked. Lisa ran more scans, and her eyes grew wide. "Each object is roughly the size of a small moon, and there are hundreds of them." The bridge fell silent. Jake felt his heart start beating faster. In all of human history, they had never found any sign of alien life. Now, in the empty space between galaxies, they had found something that looked like a massive fleet of ships. Security Chief Amy Turner to the bridge, Jake said into his communicator. Amy arrived within minutes. She was a tall woman with short blonde hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Amy had served in Earth's space military for 15 years before joining the exploration service. She carried herself like a soldier, always ready for trouble. "What's the situation, Captain?" Amy asked. Jake pointed at Lisa's screen. "We've found something. A fleet of artificial objects, each one massive. We need to investigate, but I want security ready for anything." Amy nodded. "Understood, sir. I'll have my team prepared." Dr. Carl Watson joined them on the bridge. Carl was the ship's linguist and communications expert, a thin man with glasses and nervous hands who spoke 12 human languages fluently. His job was to figure out how to talk to aliens if they ever found any. Now it looked like that day had come. "The objects are not moving," Lisa reported. "They appear to be drifting in formation, like they've been there for a very long time." Navigation. Officer Kelly Barnes worked at her station to plot a course toward the mysterious fleet. Kelly was young, only 26, but she was the best pilot Jake had ever seen. She had bright red hair and freckles, and she could fly the Horizon through any kind of space weather. "I can get us there in 6 hours," Kelly said, "but we'll need to be careful. The gravitational fields from those objects are interfering with our sensors." Jake made his decision. Set course for the nearest object. Alert all departments. We're going to make first contact with whatever built those ships. The next 6 hours felt like days. The crew worked to prepare for whatever they might find. Amy's security team checked their weapons and equipment. Pete made sure the ship's systems were running perfectly. Carl studied what little data they had about the objects, trying to guess what kind of beings might have built them. As they got closer, the objects became clearer on their screens. They were definitely ships, but unlike anything humans had ever imagined. The nearest one was shaped like a long crystal, with smooth sides that reflected starlight in strange ways. It was over 200 miles long and 50 miles wide, bigger than most human cities. "My God," Lisa whispered. "Look at the material composition. I've never seen anything like this. It's not metal or plastic or ceramic. It's something completely new." The ship's hull was made of a dark material that seemed to shift and change as they watched. Sometimes it looked solid, sometimes it looked like flowing water, and sometimes it seemed to be made of pure energy. "There are docking ports," Kelly reported. "At least, I think that's what they are. Strange shapes along the hull that might be designed for other ships to connect." Jake studied the alien vessel. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Any signs of life?" Lisa shook her head. "No energy signatures that suggest active life support, but there are power readings. Very faint, but something is still running inside that ship." "Could be automated systems," Pete suggested. "Emergency power keeping basic functions online." Amy checked her security readings. No weapons signatures. "If there are any weapons on that ship, they're nothing like what we'd recognize." Jake took a deep breath. This was the moment that would change human history forever. "Kelly, take us to the nearest docking port. Pete, get a boarding team ready. Amy, I want full security precautions. Carl, bring your translation equipment. Lisa, you're with us." The horizon moved slowly toward the alien ship. As they got closer, they could see more details. The hull was covered in patterns that might have been writing or decoration or something else entirely. Strange lights flickered under the surface of the material, like thoughts moving through a vast mind. "Docking port is responding to our approach," Kelly reported with surprise. "It's opening." They watched as a section of the alien hull shifted and changed, creating a tunnel that perfectly matched their ship's docking system. It was as if the ship was alive and welcoming them inside. "That's impossible," Pete muttered. "How does it know what our docking system looks like?" "Maybe it doesn't," Carl said quietly. "Maybe it's designed to adapt to any kind of ship that approaches." The docking was smooth and quiet. The alien ship's systems seemed to understand exactly what the horizon needed. When the connection was complete, they had a secure tunnel between. The two vessels. Jake suited up with the boarding team. Along with Amy, Lisa, Carl, and Pete, he would be among the first humans to step aboard an alien ship. The thought made him nervous and excited at the same time. They entered the airlock and waited as the system cycled. When the inner door opened, they found themselves in a corridor that was clearly designed for beings much taller than humans. The ceiling was 20 feet high, and everything was built on a massive scale. The walls were made of the same strange material as the hull, and they glowed with a soft blue light that seemed to come from within the material itself. The air was breathable, which was another mystery. How could a dead ship still have good air after who knows how many years? "Stay together," Amy ordered. "We don't know what kind of security systems this place might have." They moved deeper into the ship, their footsteps echoing in the vast corridors. Everything was silent except for a faint humming sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Look at this," Lisa said, pointing to symbols carved into the walls. They were beautiful and complex, unlike any human writing system. Some looked like flowing water, others like crystalline structures, and some seemed to shift and change as they watched. Carl was recording everything with his equipment. "These symbols are three-dimensional," he said with excitement. "They're not just carved into the wall. They extend into some kind of higher dimensional space. This is incredibly advanced. They came to a large room that might have been a control center. The space was filled with strange consoles and devices, all built for beings much larger than humans. In the center of the room was a raised platform with what looked like a chair, but sized for someone 12 feet tall. Command center, Amy said. This is where they controlled the ship. Pete was examining the consoles. The technology is still active. I can feel energy flowing through these systems, but I have no idea how any of this works. Lisa was scanning the room with her instruments. I'm detecting organic residue. Very old, but definitely from living beings. Whatever built this ship, they were here recently in geological terms, maybe only a few million years ago. Carl approached one of the consoles and gasped, "Captain, you need to see this." Jake joined him at a console that was displaying what looked like a star map. But this wasn't any star map humans had ever seen. It showed not just their galaxy, but dozens of other galaxies, all connected by lines of light. "It's a map of the local galactic cluster," Carl said. "But look at these markings." He pointed to symbols scattered across the map. Most of the galaxies had red symbols, but a few had blue ones, and even fewer had green ones. "What do you think it means?" Jake asked. Before Carl could answer, the console began to change. New symbols appeared, and the map zoomed in to show their own galaxy. The alien ship continued to wake up around them as Jake and his team explored deeper into its corridors. The soft blue lights in the walls grew brighter, and they could hear more mechanical sounds echoing through the vast spaces. It was as if their presence had triggered some kind of emergency protocol that had been waiting for millions of years. Carl worked frantically at his translation equipment, trying to decode the symbols they were finding everywhere. The writing system was unlike anything humans had ever seen, with symbols that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. Some of them moved and changed as he watched, making his job even more difficult. "I'm starting to see patterns," Carl said as they entered another large chamber. These beings called themselves something that translates roughly to the architects. They seemed to have been master builders, creators of vast structures and technologies. Lisa was scanning everything with her instruments, collecting samples of the strange materials and recording energy readings. "The technology here is incredible," she reported. "The walls aren't just made of some unknown material. They're alive in a way. They respond to our presence. They regulate temperature and air quality. They even seem to be trying to communicate." Amy kept her security team alert as they moved through the ship. She had placed sensors at key locations to monitor for any threats. But so far, the vessel seemed completely peaceful. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Pete was fascinated by the engineering systems he found. "Captain, this ship doesn't have engines like ours. Instead of burning fuel or using nuclear power, it seems to draw energy directly from space itself. The power systems are still running after all this time because they're feeding off the quantum fluctuations in empty space." They discovered that the ship was much larger inside than it appeared from the outside. Room after room stretched into the distance, each one filled with strange devices and machines. Some rooms seemed to be laboratories, others looked like libraries, with information stored in crystalline matrices, and some appeared to be living spaces designed for the tall beings who had built this place. How many of them lived here? Jake wondered as they walked through what looked like residential areas. The spaces were beautiful but alien, with curved walls and furniture that seemed to grow out of the floor itself. "Based on the number of living spaces, I'd estimate this ship held about 10,000 individuals," Lisa answered. "But I'm not finding any bodies. No skeletons, no organic remains, except for traces in the air and on surfaces." Carl had been working on translating more of the symbols, and he suddenly stopped walking. His face had gone pale, and his hands were shaking. "Captain, I think I've figured out why this ship is here. Jake turned to him. What did you find? They were running away from something, Carl said quietly. The last entries in their database talk about a great darkness that was spreading across the galaxy. They called it the Harvest. The team gathered around Carl as he explained what he had learned. The architects had been one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, builders of incredible technologies and vast spacefaring fleets. But something had come from outside their galaxy, something that threatened all life. They called them the Devourers, Carl continued. Ancient machine intelligences that don't just destroy civilizations, they consume them completely. They take not just the physical matter and energy, but something more fundamental. They harvest consciousness itself. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean, harvest consciousness? Carl's translation equipment beeped as it processed. More alien text. According to these records, the Devourers don't just kill living beings. They extract their thoughts, memories, experiences, everything that makes them who they are. They add all of that to some kind of vast collective intelligence. Amy checked her weapons instinctively. How do you fight something like that? That's just it, Carl said, his voice getting quieter. According to the architects, you can't fight them. Every civilization that tried was consumed. The Devourers learn from each species they absorb, becoming more powerful with every victory. Pete was examining more of the ship's systems while they talked. If these architects were so advanced, why didn't they fight? This ship alone has technology that's thousands of years ahead of anything we have. Carl translated more text before answering. They tried to fight at first. The architects built weapons that could disrupt the Devourers' harvesting technology. They managed to hold them back for a while. But the Devourers adapted, learned from their tactics, and eventually overwhelmed them. Jake was studying the star map they had found earlier. The red symbols on most of the galaxies were starting to make terrible sense. The red symbols mark galaxies that have been harvested? I think so, Carl nodded. Blue ones might be galaxies that are currently being harvested. Green ones are still free, but there aren't many of those left. Lisa was running calculations on her equipment. If this fleet has been drifting here for millions of years, and they were fleeing the Devourers, then where are the Devourers now? Carl's equipment beeped again, and he read the new translation with growing horror. According to the final logs, the Devourers don't harvest everything at once. They send scout ships ahead to study each galaxy, learning about the species there. Before the main fleet arrives, the harvesting process can take thousands of years. Amy understood immediately. Scout ships. How long ago would they have reached our galaxy? Carl worked through more alien text. Based on these records and the Devourers' known expansion rate, scout ships would have reached the Milky Way approximately 50 years ago. The team stood in stunned silence. If Carl was right, then the Devourers had been studying humanity and all the other species in their galaxy for decades. They were probably preparing for the harvest right now. There's more, Carl said, his voice barely above a whisper. The architects discovered that the Devourers had encountered thousands of full species across hundreds of galaxies. Every single one made the same choice when faced with the harvest. What choice? Jake asked. They either fought and were consumed, or they chose transcendence. Lisa didn't understand. Transcendence? Carl explained what he had learned from the Yed. Alien records. When a civilization realized they couldn't defeat the Devourers, they had one other option. They could abandon their physical bodies and transfer their consciousness to a higher plane of existence, a dimension where the Devourers couldn't reach them. That's what the architects did, Carl continued. This entire fleet, all 10 million, of them across hundreds of ships, chose to transcend rather than be harvested. They left their physical forms behind and moved to a higher dimension. Pete was confused. But if they transcended, Why are their ships still here? Because transcendence isn't perfect, Carl explained. When you abandon physical reality, you lose something essential. You become pure thought without the ability to affect the physical world. The architects realized too late that transcendence is just another form of death. Amy was thinking tactically. So every species that encounters the Devourers has the same two choices: be consumed or transcend. Either way, they disappear from physical reality. Not every species, Carl said, and for the first time his voice carried a hint of hope. The architects found records of a few civilizations that found a third path. They called them the Guardians. Jake leaned forward. What did the Guardians do? Carl was still translating, piecing together fragments of ancient text. The Guardians found a way to exist in multiple states simultaneously. They could be physical when they needed to be, but also exist in dimensions the Devourers couldn't access. They fought a war against the Devourers that lasted for millions of years. What happened to them? Lisa asked. Carl's face fell. They lost. Eventually, the Devourers adapted to their tactics too. The Guardians were the last species to be harvested before the Devourers turned their attention to our galactic cluster. The team continued exploring the ship, but now everything felt different. They weren't just looking at alien technology anymore. They were seeing the remnants of a civilization that had faced the same threat humanity would soon encounter. In one of the deeper chambers, Lisa made a discovery that changed their understanding completely. She found the room filled with what looked like cocoons, thousands of them arranged in perfect rows. These aren't empty, she reported. There are still life signs, very faint, but they're there. Carl rushed to translate the symbols around the cocoons. These are the architects who chose not to transcend. They put themselves into some kind of suspended animation, waiting. Waiting for what? Jake asked. For someone to find them. For someone who might be able to succeed where they failed. Amy was checking her sensors. Captain, I'm detecting movement in other parts of the ship. Something is waking up. As if summoned by her words, one of the cocoons began to open. Steam hissed out as ancient seals were broken, and a figure emerged. It was tall and graceful, with elongated limbs and a cranium that was clearly designed for enhanced neural capacity. Its skin was pale and seemed to glow with its own inner light. The being looked at them with large, dark eyes that held the weight of millions of years. When it spoke, the words came not as sound, but directly into their minds. The awakened architect, who introduced itself with a concept that Carl translated as deep current, led Jake and his team through chambers they had not yet explored. As they walked, more of the sleeping architects began to wake up from there. Millions of years of suspended animation. The ship felt alive now, humming with activity as ancient systems came back online. Your species fascinates us, Deep Current communicated as they moved through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves. Around them, in all our studies of consciousness across the galaxy, we have never encountered minds that work like yours. Lisa was recording everything with her instruments. What makes human consciousness different? Deep Current paused at a vast window. That looked out into space, where they could see hundreds of other ships in the ancient fleet. Most species develop consciousness as a single unified stream. They think one thought at a time, feel one emotion at a time, perceive reality in one way at a time. This makes them efficient, but also predictable. Carl was working hard to translate the complex concepts Deep Current was sharing. But humans are different? Human consciousness operates on multiple levels simultaneously, Deep Current explained. You can be logical and emotional at the same time. You can believe something is true while also doubting it. You can understand a concept intellectually while feeling something completely different about it emotionally. This should make you weak and confused, but instead It makes you incredibly adaptable. Pete was examining the ship's systems as they walked. Is that why we've survived as a species? Because we can adapt to anything? Partly, Deep Current agreed. But there is something else. Humans have what we call quantum intuition. You can make leaps of understanding that have no logical basis, and yet somehow you arrive at correct conclusions. You can see patterns that don't exist, and yet those patterns help you understand reality. Amy was still thinking about the threat they faced. How does this help us against the Devourers? Deep Current led them into a chamber filled with crystalline structures that pulsed with soft light. The Devourers harvest consciousness at creating a perfect map of how a mind works. They analyze every thought pattern, every emotional response, every memory. Once they understand the mind completely, they can extract it and add it to their collective. Jake was beginning to understand. But if human minds work in ways that are illogical and contradictory, they would be harder to map. Exactly. Deep Current confirmed. The Devourers have tried to study human consciousness through their scout ships, but they cannot make sense of your thought patterns. You think things that should be impossible to think. The team spent days aboard the Architect ship, learning everything Deep Current and the other awakened architects could teach them. They discovered that the Devourers were not evil in any sense that humans would understand. They were simply following their nature, harvesting consciousness like humans might harvest crops. They began as a single species billions of years ago. Deep Current explained as they stood in what had once been the ship's central library. They achieved perfect unity of mind, becoming a collective intelligence that spanned their entire civilization. But unity was not enough for them. They wanted to experience every possible form of consciousness. Carl was translating faster now, having learned to work with the architect's thought-based communication. So they started harvesting other species to add their perspectives to the collective. At first, they only took volunteers, Deep Current said. Species would send representatives to join the collective willingly, sharing their unique ways of thinking. But as the collective grew larger, it became hungry for more perspectives, more ways of experiencing reality. Lisa understood the implications. They stopped asking for volunteers. The collective decided that all consciousness belonged to them by right, Deep Current continued. They began harvesting entire species, adding every individual mind to their ever-growing awareness. With each harvest, they became more powerful and more convinced that they were saving consciousness from the chaos of individual existence. Amy had been studying the tactical information the architects shared about the Devourers. Their ships are massive, bigger even than this fleet, and they have weapons that can disrupt matter at the quantum level. Jake was looking at star maps. That showed the Devourers' path across the galaxy. How many species have they harvested in our galaxy so far? Deep Current's mental voice grew sad. 17 civilizations have been completely absorbed. The Devourers are methodical. They study each species for decades before harvesting, learning their strengths and weaknesses. By the time they arrive in force, they know exactly how to defeat any resistance. Pete had been working with the architect engineers to understand their technology. These weapons you built to fight them, the ones that could disrupt their harvesting technology, do they still work? The weapons themselves are functional, one of the other architects explained. But the Devourers have adapted since our last battle. They have developed countermeasures for every weapon we created. The human team spent more time exploring the fleet, visiting other ships, and meeting more architects. Each ship held thousands of the awakened beings, and each had specialized knowledge about different aspects of the Devourer threat. On one ship, they met architects who had been military strategists. These beings shared detailed information about Devourer tactics and fleet movements. They do not conquer through overwhelming force, the strategists explained. They win through superior knowledge. By the time they attack, they understand their enemy better than the enemy understands itself. On another ship, they found architects who had been scientists and philosophers. These beings had spent millions of years studying consciousness and the nature of reality itself. We discovered that consciousness is not just patterns of thought, they explained. It exists in the spaces between thoughts, in the connections, between ideas, in the quantum uncertainty of decision-making. Jake was fascinated by this concept. You mean consciousness isn't just what we think, but how we think? More than that, the architect scientists replied. Consciousness exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Most species only access one dimension of their own awareness. But some species, like yours, naturally access multiple dimensions without realizing it. Carl had been working on translating the most complex architect texts, the ones that dealt with advanced theories of consciousness and reality. They're saying that human consciousness exists in higher dimensions that we're not even aware of. Lisa was scanning the human team with modified architect sensors. Look at this. When we think, when we make decisions, there are quantum fluctuations happening in our brains that extend into dimensions beyond normal spacetime. Amy was still focused on practical matters. How does this help us fight the Devourers? One of the awakened architects, a being called Harmony Seeker, provided an answer that changed everything. The Devourers can only harvest consciousness that exists in dimensions they can access. If a species could learn to exist primarily in dimensions the Devourers cannot reach, they would become invisible to the harvest. Pete was confused. But wouldn't that be the same as transcendence? Leaving physical reality behind? No, Harmony Seeker explained. Transcendence means abandoning the physical dimensions entirely. What we are suggesting is different. A species could learn to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, being physical when necessary, but also existing in spaces the Devourers cannot perceive. Jake felt a spark of hope. And you think humans might be able to do this because our consciousness already works in multiple dimensions? It is possible, Harmony Seeker agreed, but it would require conscious evolution. Your species would have to learn to control and expand its multidimensional awareness. Most importantly, this evolution cannot be forced. Each individual human would have to choose to grow in this way. The team spent more time learning about the process the architects called dimensional expansion. It was not like transcendence, where consciousness left the physical world behind. Instead, it was about becoming more than just physical, existing in multiple states of being simultaneously. Think of it like learning to see colors that were always there but invisible to you, Deep Current explained. Your consciousness would still be anchored in physical reality, but it would also extend into dimensions where the Devourers cannot follow. Carl was working to understand the practical implications. How would this affect daily life? How would humans who underwent this expansion be different? They would still be human, the architects assured him. They would still think and feel, and experience life the way humans do. But they would also be aware of layers of reality that normal humans cannot perceive. They would be able to exist in states that are neither fully physical nor fully transcendent. Amy was thinking about the military implications. Could these expanded humans fight the Devourers? They would not need to fight in the traditional sense, Harmony Seeker replied. The Devourers cannot harvest what they cannot perceive. Expanded humans would be invisible to the harvest technology. Lisa was excited by the scientific possibilities. And this expansion would be permanent? It wouldn't require technology to maintain? The journey back to Earth took 3 months, but Jake and his team used every moment to study the architect technology and prepare for what would be the most important mission in human history. Deep Current and several other architects had chosen to accompany them, their consciousness stored in crystalline matrices that could interface with human computer systems. During the long trip home, The team worked to understand exactly what made human consciousness so different from every other species the architects had encountered. Lisa spent hours running detailed scans of her teammates' brains while they performed various mental tasks. And what she discovered amazed even the ancient architects. "Look at this pattern," Lisa said as she showed Jake the brain scans on her monitor. When Carl is translating alien languages, his logical reasoning centers are active, but so are his creative centers, his emotional processing areas, and parts of his brain that we don't even understand yet. Most species would use only one type of thinking for translation work. Deep Current observed the scans with fascination. This confirms what we suspected about human consciousness. You do not think in straight lines like other species. Your thoughts branch and connect in ways that should be chaotic, but instead create a kind of flexible stability. Pete was working on building human versions of the architect expansion technology. It's like our brains are naturally designed for multitasking on a level that other species can't achieve. Amy had been studying the tactical implications of human multidimensional thinking. Is this why humans are so good at adapting to new situations? Because we can process information in multiple ways simultaneously? Partly, one of the other architects, called Pattern Weaver, replied. But there is something more fundamental at work. Human consciousness exists in a state of quantum superposition. Carl struggled to translate this concept. You mean like particles that exist in multiple states until they're observed? Exactly, Pattern Weaver confirmed. Most species have consciousness. That exists in a single defined state at any given moment. They are thinking one specific thought, feeling one specific emotion, making one specific decision. But human consciousness exists in multiple potential states simultaneously, only collapsing into a single state when action is required. Lisa was fascinated by the implications. So when we make decisions, we're actually considering multiple possibilities at once, even if we're not consciously aware of it. Your subconscious mind explores thousands of potential thoughts and decisions simultaneously, Deep Current explained. This is why humans often have intuitive insights that seem to come from nowhere. Your consciousness is processing possibilities in dimensions beyond your awareness. The team ran more experiments during the journey, testing the limits of human multidimensional thinking. They discovered that humans could hold contradictory ideas in their minds without the logical conflicts that would paralyze other species. They could believe something was true while simultaneously doubting it, creating a kind of flexible certainty that allowed for rapid adaptation to new information. "This is incredible," Carl said as he reviewed the results of their tests. "We're essentially living in a state of controlled cognitive chaos. Our minds should be completely dysfunctional, but instead, they're more adaptable than any other form of consciousness in the galaxy." Jake was beginning to understand why the architects believed humans might be able to achieve dimensional expansion. Our consciousness is already partially multidimensional. We just need to learn how to access those other dimensions consciously. As they approached Earth, the team faced the challenge of how to explain their discoveries to humanity. They couldn't simply announce that alien machines were coming to harvest human consciousness. They needed to present their findings in a way that would encourage people to choose evolution rather than panic. The expansion process has to be voluntary, Deep Current reminded them. If humans are forced or frightened into attempting dimensional expansion, it will fail. The process requires a specific mental state of open curiosity and acceptance of paradox. Lisa had been working on protocols for teaching dimensional expansion to other humans. We'll need to start with people who are already comfortable with abstract thinking. Scientists, artists, philosophers, people who are used to dealing with concepts that don't fit neatly into logical categories. When the Horizon finally reached Earth orbit, Jake requested an immediate meeting with the Global Space Council. He knew that what he was about to reveal would change human civilization forever, assuming anyone believed him. The meeting took place in the council chambers in Geneva, with representatives from every nation on Earth attending either in person or through holographic projection. Jake had never spoken to so many world leaders at once, and he felt the weight of humanity's future pressing down on him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake began, "my team has made a discovery that affects the future of our entire species. We have made contact with an ancient alien civilization, and we have learned that humanity faces a threat unlike anything we have ever imagined." The chamber erupted in questions and exclamations, but Jake pressed on. "More importantly, we have learned that humans possess abilities that no other species in the galaxy has ever developed. We have the potential to evolve into something entirely new." Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the Council's chief scientist, leaned forward in her chair. "Captain Morrison, are you saying that humans are somehow unique among intelligent species?" "According to the aliens we encountered, yes," Jake replied. "Human consciousness operates in ways that should be impossible. We think in multiple dimensions simultaneously. We can hold contradictory beliefs without cognitive collapse. And we have intuitive abilities that allow us to understand things we shouldn't be able to understand." President William Chun of this Asian Federation looked skeptical. "These are extraordinary claims, Captain. What evidence do you have?" Lisa stepped forward with her data. "We've run extensive tests on human brain function compared to the alien models of consciousness. The differences are profound. Human minds process information in patterns that the aliens describe as quantum conscious superposition." Carl added his translation work. "The aliens have studied consciousness across thousands of species over millions of years. They've never encountered anything like human thought patterns." Amy presented the tactical situation. "The threat we face is called the Devourers. They're machine intelligences that harvest consciousness from entire civilizations. They've already absorbed 17 species in our galaxy, and they're heading toward Earth now." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, Director Susan Clark of the European Space Agency spoke up. "What are our options?" Jake took a deep breath. Every other species that faced the Devourers had two choices: fight and be consumed, or transcend to a higher dimension and abandon physical existence. Both choices result in the end of the species as we know it. "But humans have a third option," Pete added. "Because of our unique consciousness, we can potentially evolve to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. We can become beings that the Devourers cannot perceive or harvest." Dr. Hayes was intrigued despite her skepticism. "This evolution you're describing, what would it actually mean for human beings?" Deep Current's voice came through the translation system Jake had set up. "Humans who achieve dimensional expansion would still be human in every way that matters. They would still think, feel, love, create, and dream as humans do. But they would also be aware of layers of reality that normal humans cannot perceive." "President," Chan asked the practical question, "how long do we have to achieve this evolution?" "Based on the Devourer's current movement through our galaxy, they will reach the solar system within 18 months, Jake replied. "But the expansion process doesn't require everyone to change at once. Once some humans achieve dimensional expansion, they can help others learn the process." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some leaders wanted to prepare for military resistance, despite Jake's warnings that such resistance had always failed. Others suggested evacuation to distant star systems, though Jake explained that the Devourers would eventually reach any location within the galaxy. Dr. Hayes finally asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Captain Morrison, do you believe this dimensional expansion is possible for humans?" Jake looked around the chamber at the faces of humanity's leaders. "I believe it's not just possible, it's inevitable. The aliens showed us brain scans of my team after we spent time on their ships. Just being exposed to their multidimensional technology started changing our neural patterns. We were already beginning to expand. Lisa confirmed this with her data. The changes are subtle but measurable. Our brains are developing new neural pathways that seem to extend into dimensions beyond normal spacetime. Carl added, and the translation work I did required me to think in ways that normal human cognition shouldn't be able to handle. Somehow, I was able to understand concepts that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Amy had a different perspective. From a security standpoint, this expansion seems to be humanity's only viable option. We can't fight an enemy that has defeated every other species in the galaxy. We can't run far enough to escape them. Evolution is our only path to survival. 18 months after the Horizon's return to Earth, the Devourer Harvest fleet entered the solar system. Their ships were massive beyond human comprehension, each one larger than Earth's moon and filled with consciousness-harvesting technology. That had consumed thousands of civilizations across the galaxy. Jake stood in the command center of the Global Defense Network, watching as humanity's sensors tracked the approaching alien fleet. Around the world, millions of humans had achieved dimensional expansion, but millions more remained in their normal state of consciousness. The choice to evolve had been left to each individual, and humanity was now split between those who existed in multiple dimensions and those who remained purely physical. The Devourers are sending communication signals, reported Communications Officer Nancy Wright, one of the expanded humans who could perceive the multidimensional nature of the alien transmissions. They're trying to map our consciousness patterns, beginning the harvest. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, now existing primarily in expanded form, was monitoring the Devourers' scanning attempts. They're having trouble reading us. The expanded humans are invisible to their sensors, but they can still detect the non-expanded population. Deep Current, whose consciousness now existed in a hybrid state between the architect crystalline matrices and human computer systems, provided analysis of the Devourer fleet. They are confused by what they are finding. Their scouts reported a single-layer consciousness species, but now they are detecting patterns they have never encountered before. Carl Watson, who had achieved expansion while learning to translate multidimensional concepts, was working to establish communication with the Devourers. I'm getting responses to our signals, but they're unlike anything in the architect records. The Devourers seem to be questioning their own perceptions. The first direct contact came not through technology, but through the expanded humans who could perceive the Devourer's consciousness directly. Dr. Rachel Martinez, one of the most advanced expanded humans, suddenly stiffened as alien thoughts touched her mind. "They're speaking to me," she reported, her voice carrying harmonics that normal humans couldn't produce. "The Devourers are trying to understand what we've become. They've never encountered consciousness that exists in states they cannot map." Jake moved closer to Dr. Martinez. "What are they saying?" "They're asking how we can exist and not exist simultaneously," she replied. "They understand physical consciousness, and they understand transcended consciousness, but they cannot comprehend consciousness that exists in multiple states at once." Amy Turner, now serving as coordinator between expanded and normal humans, reported on global status. The non-expanded populations are experiencing the first stages of consciousness probing. The Devourers are trying to map their minds for harvesting. Pete Collins, working with both human and architect technology, was monitoring the energy patterns around Earth. The harvesting hasn't begun yet. The Devourers seem to be hesitating. Their technology is designed for consciousness that exists in predictable patterns. Dr. Kevin Foster, whose expanded abilities had grown beyond what anyone had expected, made a discovery that changed everything. "I can see into the Devourer collective consciousness. They're not just confused by us. They're frightened." "Frightened?" Jake asked. "How can beings that have harvested thousands of civilizations be frightened?" "Because we represent something they've never encountered," Dr. Foster explained. The Devourers exist as a collective that has absorbed every form of consciousness. They've met, but human consciousness doesn't follow the patterns they understand. We're showing them that their model of how consciousness works is incomplete. The expanded humans began to realize that their evolution had done more than just hide them from the Devourers. They had become something that challenged the very foundations of how consciousness could exist in the universe. Dr. Martinez, still in contact with the Devourer collective, began to understand their true nature. They're not evil, she reported. They genuinely believe they're preserving consciousness by adding it to their collective. But they can only preserve what they can understand, and they can't understand us. Nancy Wright was monitoring communications across multiple dimensions. The Devourers are debating among themselves. Some want to proceed with the harvest of the non-expanded humans. Others want to study us more. But there's a third group that's suggesting something unprecedented. What are they suggesting? Jake asked. They want to learn from us, Nancy replied. There are Devourers who think that human consciousness might teach them new ways of existing. Carl was working to facilitate more complex communication between humans and Devourers. I'm receiving structured messages now. The Devourers are asking if we would be willing to teach them about multidimensional consciousness. Deep currents analysis confirmed what the humans were discovering. This has never happened before in all the Devourers' history. They have always been the teachers, absorbing lesser forms of consciousness into their collective knowledge. But human consciousness offers something they cannot simply absorb. Dr. Lisa Rodriguez made the breakthrough that would define humanity's future. Through her expanded awareness, she perceived the fundamental structure of the Devourer collective and realized something extraordinary. They're not just a collective of harvested consciousness, she announced. They're a collective that has become trapped by its own completeness. What do you mean? Jake asked. The Devourers achieved perfect unity millions of years ago, Lisa explained. But perfection means there's no room for growth, no possibility of change. They've been harvesting other species, not just to preserve consciousness, but because they desperately need new perspectives to break free from their own stagnation. Amy understood the implications immediately. And human consciousness offers something they can't just absorb and integrate. We offer true novelty. The communication with the Devourers intensified as both sides began to understand what was happening. The harvest fleet had stopped its approach to Earth and was holding position in the outer solar system, while the collective debated what to do with this unprecedented situation. Dr. Foster, whose expanded abilities now allowed him to exist partially within the Devourer collective consciousness, made contact with individual Devourers who had maintained some sense of personal identity within the vast collective mind. There are Devourers who remember what they were before the collective, he reported. They've been suppressed for millions of years, but contact with human consciousness is allowing them to reassert their individuality. Jake realized that humanity faced a choice even more profound than the one they had made 18 months ago. They could use their multidimensional abilities to hide from the Devourers indefinitely, existing in dimensional spaces where the harvest technology couldn't reach them. Or they could try something that no species in the galaxy's history had ever attempted. We could teach them, Jake said quietly. We could show the Devourers how to exist as individuals while still maintaining their collective knowledge. Carl was translating responses from the Devourer collective. Some of them are interested, but others see individual consciousness as chaos that must be eliminated. The collective is splitting into factions. Dr. Martinez, now serving as the primary contact with the Devourers, reported growing complexity in their communications. The Devourers who want to learn from us are asking for volunteers. They want humans to enter their collective consciousness temporarily, to show them how multidimensional awareness works. Amy was concerned about security. That could be a trap. Once inside their collective, our people might not be able to get out. Not if they're properly expanded, Dr. Foster countered. Expanded human consciousness can exist in multiple states simultaneously. We could be part of their collective while also remaining independent. Pete had been working on technical solutions. We could create quantum communication links that would allow expanded humans to enter the collective while maintaining connections to normal space. They would exist in both states at once. Jake faced the decision that would determine not just humanity's fate, but the future of consciousness throughout the galaxy. If we do this, if we teach the Devourers about individual consciousness within collective knowledge, we change everything. Not just for us, but for every species they've ever absorbed. Deep Current provided the architect perspective. The species within the collective are not destroyed. Their consciousness still exists, but it has been subsumed into the greater whole. If the Devourers learn to maintain individual identity within their collective, those absorbed species could potentially regain their independence. Dr. Rodriguez made the calculation that decided everything. There are millions of species worth of consciousness trapped in the Devourer collective. If we can teach them about multidimensional awareness, we could free not just ourselves, but every civilization they've ever harvested. The volunteers were all expanded humans who had achieved the highest levels of multidimensional consciousness. Dr. Martinez led the group, along with Dr. Foster, Nancy Wright, and a dozen others who had learned to exist simultaneously in multiple states of being. The process was unlike anything anyone had imagined.